7 scruffy puppies were left behind, labeled unadoptable by everyone who saw them. But when a wealthy man decided to give them a chance, the entire town laughed at him. Years later, the same people who mocked him were on their knees, begging for help. What happened in between will leave you speechless. Elliot Lancaster, a reserved but kind-hearted millionaire, had always felt a void in his life. Despite owning one of the most beautiful estates in the state and having a thriving business empire, his sprawling mansion felt cold and empty. Years earlier, a tragic accident had claimed the life of his beloved Labrador, Luna, the companion who had been with him since his youth. Since then, Elliot had avoided getting another pet, feeling the weight of loss too deeply. One crisp autumn morning, while visiting a local shelter for a charity donation, he overheard hushed whispers about a group of puppies. The staff was discussing 7 siblings that had been found abandoned near an old quarry. Their mother had died, and the pups were covered in scars and fleas, malnourished to the point of being skeletal. The shelter staff quietly admitted that these puppies were unlikely to find homes. "Nobody wants dogs like that," someone murmured. Intrigued, Elliot asked to see them. When the door to their enclosure opened, 7 tiny, trembling figures peeked out. Their fur was patchy, their ribs visible beneath their thin coats. Yet, despite their condition, their tails wagged weakly, and one particularly bold pup stumbled forward, pawing at Elliot's shoe. "They're sickly, likely to need ongoing care," the shelter director warned. "Honestly, we've considered putting them down. Nobody will take all 7. Elliot looked at the pups, then back at the director. "I'll take them." The staff exchanged incredulous glances, trying to stifle their laughter. "All of them?" someone asked, disbelief dripping from their voice. "Yes, all of them," Elliot replied firmly. "Prepare the adoption papers." Word of Elliot's decision quickly spread through the town. He became the subject of ridicule among his social circles. People mocked him, calling it a publicity stunt or a midlife crisis. They sneered at the idea of a millionaire wasting his resources on broken dogs. But Elliot didn't care. He brought the pups home and began the arduous journey of nursing them back to health. What he didn't know was that his decision would soon turn his life, and the lives of those who mocked him, upside down. Elliot's mansion, with its sprawling grounds and luxurious interiors, became a sanctuary for the 7 pups. He named them Riley as Harper, Dakota, Scout, Bailey, Logan, and Quinn. Each puppy had its unique quirks. Riley, the smallest, was bold and adventurous despite her frailty. Bailey, the largest, was protective of his siblings. Scout, with a crooked ear, was the most curious and often led their playful mischief. The initial days were grueling. The pups required round-the-clock care, frequent vet visits, special diets, and treatment for infections and skin conditions. Elliot hired a team of experts, including a veterinarian and a professional trainer, to help rehabilitate them. He spent hours each day with the pups, earning their trust and affection through patience and kindness. Slowly but surely, the puppies began to thrive. Their fur grew thicker and glossier, and their personalities blossomed. The once timid pups now explored the estate's vast gardens, playing and chasing each other under Elliot's watchful eye. For the first time in years, the mansion echoed with life and laughter. Despite his joy, the ridicule from the community intensified. The local newspaper ran a mocking headline, "Millionaire's mansion goes to the dogs literally." Gossip spread among the town's elite, who viewed Elliot's devotion to the pups as eccentric at best and foolish at worst. At a charity gala, one of Elliot's acquaintances, a businessman named Richard Vaughan, cornered him with a smirk. "Elliot, what's this I hear about you adopting 7 strays?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Elliot, unfazed, replied with a calm smile, "They're not strays anymore, Richard. They're family." Richard chuckled, shaking his head. "Family? They're just animals. You're wasting your time." Elliot's gaze hardened. "Sometimes, Richard, the love you give comes back to you in ways you can't imagine. Maybe one day you'll understand that." As the weeks turned into months, Elliot's bond with the puppies deepened. He discovered that each one had an uncanny ability to sense emotions. On days when Elliot felt overwhelmed, Riley would rest her tiny head on his lap. her soft eyes filled with understanding. When he worked late into the night, Bailey would lie at his feet, a silent guardian. One evening, as Elliot sat by the fireplace, he reflected on how much the puppies had changed his life. "You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing," he said softly, scratching Dakota behind the ears. The pup wagged his tail in response, as if he understood. But the community's derision wasn't the only challenge Elliot faced. Unbeknownst to him, darker forces were at play. A group of thieves had been targeting wealthy estates in the area, and Elliot's mansion, with its opulent reputation, was on their radar. The gang, led by a cunning and ruthless figure known only as Mason, began planning their next heist. One night, under the cover of darkness, the thieves made their move. They cut through the estate's perimeter fence, unaware of the silent sentinels that awaited them. The 7 pups, once deemed weak and unworthy, would soon prove just how wrong everyone had been. The estate was shrouded in silence as Mason and his crew approached, their black-clad figures blending into the shadows. Armed with tools and confidence, they believed the job would be a simple grab and go. The mansion's grandeur promised a treasure trove of valuables, jewelry, art, and perhaps even cash stashed away in safes. What the gang hadn't anticipated was the heightened awareness of the 7 pups, who had grown not only in health but in alertness and intelligence under Elliot's care. Each one had been trained to recognize unusual sounds and movements, thanks to the professional trainer Elliot had hired. While they were still playful and loving companions, they were also a loyal pack that had bonded deeply with Elliot and with each other. It was Riley who first noticed something was amiss. Her sharp ears picked up faint rustling near the fence line, a sound too deliberate to be the wind. She perked up from her spot by the fireplace, letting out a soft growl. Harper, ever the protector, joined her, nudging Bailey awake. One by one, the pups stirred, their instincts kicking in. Together, they crept toward the source of the disturbance, their movements almost silent against the mansion's polished floors. Outside, Mason directed his crew with hand signals, pointing toward the side entrance. "We'll be in and out before anyone knows we're here," he whispered. The team nodded, their confidence bolstered by the apparent lack of security. They picked the lock on the side door, easing it open without a sound. The intruders hadn't accounted for the puppies' sharp noses. As soon as the door clicked open, Scout's nose twitched, catching the scent of strangers. He barked sharply, the sound echoing through the halls. The gang froze, their eyes darting around in the dim light. "Relax," Mason hissed. "It's just a dog." Inside, the pups sprang into action. Bailey, the largest and strongest, took the lead, positioning himself near the main entryway. Dakota and Logan flanked him, their postures alert and ready. Riley and Harper raced to wake Elliot, pawing at his bedroom door and barking urgently. The commotion jolted Elliot awake, his heart pounding as he registered the alarm in their cries. "What's going on, guys?" he murmured, rubbing his eyes. But the pups' frantic barks made it clear. This wasn't a false alarm. Grabbing his phone, Elliot checked the live feed from the mansion's security cameras. His stomach dropped as he saw the figures moving through the hallways. Without hesitation, he dialed 911, his voice calm but firm as he explained the situation. "Intruders in the house. My dogs alerted me. Send help immediately." Meanwhile, the intruders advanced through the mansion, their flashlights sweeping over priceless art and gleaming furniture. Mason gestured toward a large display cabinet filled with antique vases. "Start there," he whispered. But before they could reach it, Bailey stepped into the hallway, his deep growl reverberating like a warning. Mason stopped in his tracks, his flashlight illuminating the dog's imposing silhouette. "What the?" one of the thieves muttered, taking a step back. Another bark rang out, this time from Dakota, who appeared at the opposite end of the hall with Logan by his side. The thieves were now boxed in, the dog's growls growing louder and more menacing. "They're just dogs," Mason snapped, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. He reached for a crowbar, brandishing it in an attempt to scare them off. But the pups didn't budge. Instead, they moved closer, their coordinated movements suggesting a level of intelligence that unsettled the intruders. In the master bedroom, Elliot quickly slipped on a jacket and grabbed a flashlight. Riley and Harper were at his heels, as he made his way downstairs, his phone still in hand. "Help is on the way," he whispered to the pups, as if they understood. Back in the hallway, Mason's crew began to panic. "This isn't worth it," one of them muttered. "Let's get out of here." "Not without something to show for it," Mason growled. He took a step toward the display cabinet, but as he did, Bailey lunged forward, his bark sharp and commanding. The movement startled Mason, who stumbled backward and dropped the crowbar with a loud clang. The sound seemed to embolden the pups. Scout and Quinn joined the others, their presence turning the once confident thieves into a disoriented group of men, too focused on retreat to remember their plan. The gang made a break for the side door, only to find Riley and Harper blocking their exit. The smallest of the pack, Riley let out a bark so fierce it belied her size. Harper, standing tall beside her, growled low and steady, daring the intruders to come closer. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Mason's face twisted in frustration as he realized their time was up. "Let's go!" he barked, shoving one of his men toward the window. The thieves scrambled to escape, but the pups pursued them to the edge of the property, their barks echoing through the night. By the time the police arrived, the gang was gone, leaving behind their tools and a few personal items, a wallet, a phone, that would later help identify them. Elliot stood at the edge of the lawn, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and pride as he surveyed his loyal companions. One by one, the pups returned to his side, their tails wagging despite the tension of the moment. "You saved us," he murmured, crouching down to ruffle Bailey's ears. "All of you." As the officers began their investigation, one of them approached Elliot, his expression one of admiration. "Your dogs are incredible," he said. "They held them off long enough for us to get here. If it weren't for them," Elliot smiled, looking down at the 7 pups gathered around him. "They're not just dogs," he said softly. "They're heroes." The morning after the break-in, the mansion was buzzing with activity. Police officers and investigators combed through the property, collecting evidence left behind by the intruders. The staff, shaken but unharmed, marveled at the courage of the 7 pups, recounting the events to anyone who would listen. Elliot stood on the front steps of the mansion, speaking with Officer Martinez, the lead investigator. "They were incredibly organized," she remarked, flipping through her notepad. "Your dogs did more than alert you. They likely prevented the situation from escalating into something much worse." Elliot glanced at the pups lounging nearby, their tails wagging as they soaked up the morning sun. Each one carried an air of pride, as if they knew they'd done something extraordinary. "I don't know how I'll ever repay them," Elliot said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Officer Martinez smiled. "Well, for starters, you might want to think about enrolling them in formal security training. With instincts like theirs, they'd be unstoppable." The idea planted itself firmly in Elliot's mind. The pups had already proven their loyalty and courage, but with proper training, they could become even more formidable. Later that day, he made a call to a renowned canine training academy, explaining what had happened. The academy director, intrigued by the story, offered to visit the estate personally to assess the pups' potential. In the days that followed, news of the break-in and the heroic puppies spread quickly. Local papers ran headlines like "Millionaire's dogs foil thieves in daring heist" and "Puppies turn protectors save the day." The mansion, once the subject of ridicule, became a symbol of resilience and loyalty. Neighbors who had once mocked Elliot's decision to adopt the pups now stopped by to offer their support. Mrs. Harris, who had previously dismissed Elliot as eccentric, arrived with a basket of homemade cookies. "I can't believe how brave they were," she said, watching Riley and Harper play on the lawn. "You must be so proud." Elliot accepted the gesture graciously, though he couldn't help but recall the cold shoulders and whispers from these same people just weeks ago. He nodded, replying simply, "They've always been special." The trainer from the academy arrived later that week, a wiry man named Victor with a sharp eye and an evident passion for dogs. He observed the pups carefully, noting their behavior, agility, and responsiveness. "They're remarkable," Victor said after his assessment. "Individually, they have strong instincts, but what's truly extraordinary is how they work as a unit. That's rare, especially in dogs from such diverse backgrounds." Elliot beamed with pride. Do you think they'd do well with formal training? Victor nodded. Absolutely. With the right guidance, they could be trained for advanced security, search and rescue, or even therapy work. The sky's the limit with these 7. The decision was made. Over the next few months, the pups underwent rigorous training under Victor's supervision. The once playful and slightly unruly pack learned discipline and advanced skills, from detecting intruders to performing coordinated maneuvers. They still had their playful moments. Riley, the smallest, often tried to sneak treats from Victor's pocket, but their progress was undeniable. Meanwhile, Elliot took steps to ensure the mansion's security was fortified. He installed state-of-the-art surveillance systems and reinforced the perimeter fencing. But more than anything, he trusted the instincts of his newfound protectors. The community's perception of Elliot continued to evolve. Parents brought their children to meet the hero pups, and local businesses offered discounts and services to show their appreciation. Elliot, ever humble, redirected the attention to the pups, organizing a small charity event to raise funds for local animal shelters. They gave me a family, he explained during a heartfelt speech. It's only right to pay it forward. The event was a resounding success, attended by hundreds of people eager to support the cause. The pups, now local celebrities, were showered with affection and gifts, chew toys, treats, and even personalized collars with their names engraved. Despite the growing attention, life at the mansion settled into a peaceful rhythm. The pups continued their training while enjoying the comforts of their new home. Elliot, who had once felt isolated in his opulent estate, found himself surrounded by the warmth and companionship he had long craved. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elliot sat on the porch with Bailey at his feet and Riley curled up in his lap. The other pups played nearby, chasing fireflies and tumbling over one another in the soft grass. "They have all changed my life," Elliot said softly, stroking Riley's fur. "I thought I was rescuing you, but it turns out you rescued me." The pups seemed to understand, their wagging tails and adoring eyes conveying a silent promise. They would always protect the man who had given them a second chance. With the pups' heroics and training making headlines, it wasn't long before the media took an even deeper interest in their story. Elliot found himself inundated with requests for interviews, photo shoots, and even offers for commercial deals featuring the pups. Initially hesitant, he agreed to a few, ensuring that any proceeds would go toward supporting local shelters and rescues. The media frenzy, however, brought unexpected challenges. One afternoon, a sleek black car rolled up to the mansion's gates. A woman in a tailored suit stepped out, her confident demeanor matched by the sharpness of her appearance. "Elliot Fairchild?" she asked as he approached the gate. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" Elliot replied cautiously. "I'm Vanessa Morgan, talent agent," she said, handing him a business card embossed with gold lettering. "I represent clients who specialize in showcasing remarkable animals. Your pups are a sensation, and I'd like to discuss opportunities to capitalize on their fame." Elliot furrowed his brow. "I appreciate the offer, but they're not performers. They're family." Vanessa smiled, undeterred. "Of course, Mr. Fairchild, but think of the impact they could make. A campaign for a pet food company could generate millions, a portion of which could fund shelters and rescues across the country. Imagine the lives that could be saved." The idea of helping more animals tugged at Elliot's heart, but he remained wary. "I'll think about it," he said, pocketing the card. As the days went by, more people began showing up at the mansion uninvited. Families eager to meet the pups gathered outside the gates, holding signs and calling their names. While many were harmless admirers, a few became a cause for concern. One evening, Elliot returned from the grocery store to find a man scaling the fence. The pups, alerted by the commotion, barked furiously, their training kicking in as they formed a defensive line at the base of the wall. "Hey, get down from there!" Elliot shouted, rushing toward the scene. The man, startled, lost his grip and tumbled to the ground. He scrambled to his feet, shouting, "I just wanted to see them, they're heroes." Elliot sighed, his frustration mounting. "This isn't a zoo," he said firmly. "If you care about animals, there are better ways to show it. Volunteer at a shelter. Adopt a pet in need." The man nodded sheepishly before retreating, But the incident left Elliot uneasy. He realized that the growing attention was beginning to infringe on the peaceful life he had worked so hard to build for himself and the pups. At the same time, tensions arose within the local community. While many celebrated the pups' fame, others grew envious. A neighbor, Mr. Carmichael, voiced his displeasure during a town meeting. "It's bad enough he flaunts his wealth with that massive estate," Carmichael sneered. "Now he's turned it into a circus with those dogs. All this attention is disrupting our neighborhood." Another neighbor, Mrs. Langley, stood up in defense of Elliot. "Those dogs saved lives and are helping the community," she argued. "What have you done lately, Mr. Carmichael?" The meeting devolved into a heated debate, with some siding with Carmichael and others praising Elliot and the pups. Elliot, who had attended the meeting to discuss potential donations to the local park, found himself caught in the crossfire. As he left, a reporter approached him, microphone in hand. "Mr. Fairchild, how do you respond to accusations that your dogs are causing a disturbance?" Elliot paused, choosing his words carefully. "My dogs have brought joy and hope to many people. If that's considered a disturbance, then I suppose I'm guilty. But my focus will always be on doing what's right, for them and for the community." Despite the challenges, Elliot found solace in the pups. Their bond only deepened as they continued their training, now incorporating teamwork drills designed to strengthen their ability to work in tandem. Victor, the trainer, marveled at their progress. "Bailey is shaping up to be an excellent leader," he noted during a session. "And Riley's quick thinking is unmatched. They're not just working as a pack, they're a family." Elliot couldn't help but smile. "They've taught me more about loyalty and love than I ever thought possible." One evening, as the pups lounged by the fireplace, Elliot received a call from Vanessa Morgan. "Mr. Fairchild, I understand your hesitation," she began. "But there's a new opportunity I think you'll want to hear about. A documentary filmmaker is interested in telling your story, not just about the pups, but about you as well." Elliot hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that level of exposure." "This isn't about fame," Vanessa assured him. "It's about sharing a message of hope, resilience, and the bond between humans and animals. Think of the impact it could have." After a long pause, Elliot replied, "I'll consider it, but only if the focus remains on the pups and the cause." As he hung up, he glanced at the 7 dogs curled up together, their contentment a stark contrast to the challenges swirling around them. Whatever decision he made, it would be for them, and for the countless animals still waiting for a second chance. As the weeks passed, Elliot grappled with the weight of his decisions. The pups' fame continued to soar, with stories of their heroics spreading far and wide. Offers from companies and organizations poured in, ranging from advertisements to public appearances. Each promised not only financial gains, but also platforms to highlight the plight of rescue animals. But Elliot couldn't shake a lingering unease. Would accepting these opportunities compromise the simple, peaceful life he had promised the pups? He found himself questioning whether the benefits truly outweighed the potential costs. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elliot sat on the sprawling back porch of his estate. The pups sprawled around him. Riley, the most affectionate of the group, nudged his hand with her nose, sensing his tension. "You always know, don't you?" Elliot murmured, scratching behind her ears. "What would you do if you were me?" The golden retriever gazed up at him with soulful eyes, her silent presence more comforting than any advice could have been. Victor arrived shortly after for their scheduled training session. He noticed Elliot's distracted demeanor and paused. "You've got a lot on your mind," he observed. Elliot sighed. "I just don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Everyone seems to have an opinion. Vanessa, the neighbors, the media. I don't want to lose sight of what's important." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Elliot, these dogs already know what's important. Love, loyalty, and doing their best in the moment. The question is, are you staying true to those values?" Elliot considered Victor's words as they watched the pups dart across the yard, their playful energy a stark contrast to the weight he carried. That evening, Elliot decided to attend a community fundraiser at the local shelter, hoping to reconnect with the roots of his mission. As he entered the modest event space, the room buzzed with chatter. Volunteers bustled about, arranging tables laden with donated goods for auction. When Elliot and the pups entered, the room fell silent for a moment. Then applause broke out. The shelter director, a kind woman named Teresa, rushed over to greet him. "Elliot!" "We're so glad you could make it," she said warmly. "You've done so much for us already. Just having you here means the world." Elliot felt a pang of guilt. Amid the chaos of the past few weeks, he hadn't visited the shelter as often as he used to. Looking around at the worn walls and the dedication etched on every volunteer's face, he realized how much the work here still mattered. During the event, a young boy approached him, clutching a crayon drawing of the pups. "Mister, are these your dogs?" he asked shyly. Elliot crouched down, smiling. "They are. Did you draw this?" The boy nodded, his cheeks flushing red. "I want to be like them when I grow up, brave and strong." Elliot's heart swelled. In that moment, he understood the true power of the pups' story, not as a spectacle, but as a source of inspiration. The next day, Elliot gathered the pups in the living room, as if they could weigh in on his deliberation. He placed Vanessa Morgan's business card on the coffee table beside a pamphlet from the shelter fundraiser. "What do you think, guys?" he asked aloud. "Do we take the big opportunities and hope to make a difference? Or do we stick with what we know and keep things simple?" Bailey, the unofficial leader, padded over and placed a paw on the pamphlet. Riley barked softly, while the other pups wagged their tails. Elliot laughed. "So you're saying we should stay grounded but still find ways to help, huh? Smart dogs." With their silent vote of confidence, Elliot made up his mind. He would strike a balance, leveraging the pups' fame responsibly, while staying true to the values that brought them together in the first place. A few days later, Elliot called Vanessa Morgan to share his decision. "I'm willing to collaborate on select projects," he said, "but only if the proceeds directly support shelters and rescues, and the focus has to stay on the pups and their story, not me." Vanessa agreed, sensing the conviction in his voice. "I think that's a fantastic approach, Elliot. Let's start small and build from there." As he hung up, Elliot felt a sense of relief. He had taken control of the narrative, ensuring that the pups' story remained authentic and impactful. Later that week, Elliot visited the shelter again, this time with a concrete plan. "Teresa," he began, "how would you feel about collaborating on a campaign to promote adoption? The pups and I could help raise awareness and funds." Teresa's eyes lit up. "Elliot, that would be incredible. We've seen an uptick in adoptions thanks to your story, but this could take it to another level." Together, they brainstormed ideas for a series of heartfelt videos showcasing the shelter's animals and the transformation that love and care could bring. By the end of the month, the first campaign was live. The videos featured the pups interacting with shelter animals, demonstrating patience and kindness as they played and trained together. The response was overwhelming, with donations pouring in and adoption inquiries skyrocketing. Elliot watched one of the videos from the comfort of his living room. The pups gathered around him. As he reached for the remote, a notification popped up on his phone. A message from someone who had just adopted a senior dog featured in the campaign. "Thank you for sharing your story. It inspired us to give Max a forever home," it read. Elliot smiled, feeling a deep sense of purpose. The journey had its challenges, but in the end, staying true to his values had led to something extraordinary. The success of Elliot's campaign brought hope to shelters nationwide, but it also drew attention from unexpected and potentially unwelcome sources. While the pups were hailed as heroes and the campaign celebrated for its impact, whispers of skepticism began circulating in certain circles. Some questioned Elliot's motivations, while others delved into his past, searching for anything to tarnish the image of the man behind the now famous dogs. One evening, as Elliot sat at his desk finalizing plans for an upcoming adoption drive, a notification on his phone caught his eye. It was a news article, its headline bold and inflammatory. "Fairchild's Hero Dogs, a genuine mission or a media stunt?" Elliot frowned, clicking on the link. The article detailed his recent efforts, but hinted at ulterior motives, suggesting that his sudden rise to prominence was calculated rather than heartfelt. It quoted a former colleague from Elliot's corporate days who claimed, "Elliot always had a knack for turning situations to his advantage. This is just another example of that." Elliot's stomach churned. He had left that world behind years ago, determined to build a life centered on integrity and purpose. Yet, it seemed his past was being dredged up to discredit his efforts. The next morning, Victor arrived for the pup's training session, his expression unusually serious. "Have you seen the news?" he asked. Elliot nodded, gesturing to the article open on his laptop. "It's frustrating, but I can't let it derail what we're doing." Victor hesitated. "It's not just that article. There's a video circulating online, a supposed investigation claiming the pups were trained as part of some secret program and that you're using them to gain fame." Elliot froze. "What? That's absurd." Victor pulled out his phone, showing Elliot the video. It was poorly edited, with ominous music and grainy footage of the pups during their early training days. The narrator claimed that Elliot had purchased the dogs from an undisclosed elite breeder and fabricated their rescue story to build his reputation. Elliot's jaw tightened. "This is a blatant lie. Those dogs were saved from awful conditions, and everything we've done has been to help others, not to inflate my ego." Victor nodded. "I know that, and so do the people who've seen you work. But this kind of thing can spread fast. You need to address it before it gains traction." That evening, Elliot sat in front of his computer drafting a statement. He kept it simple and heartfelt, addressing the rumors head-on. "To everyone who has supported our journey, I want to set the record straight. My dogs are not elite specimens bred for fame. They are rescues, survivors of neglect and hardship. Together, we've worked hard to turn their lives around and help others in the process. This mission has always been about love, redemption, and second chances. I will continue to stand by that no matter what." After posting the statement on social media, Elliot felt a flicker of unease. Would it be enough to counter the negativity? The following days brought a mix of reactions. Many rallied around Elliot, sharing their personal experiences of how the campaign had inspired them. Messages poured in from families who had adopted shelter animals, thanking him for his work. Yet, the whispers of doubt lingered, fueled by sensationalist articles and clickbait headlines. One evening, a knock at the door interrupted Elliot's thoughts. He opened it to find a middle-aged man standing there, his expression stern. "Mr. Fairchild?" the man asked. "Yes, that's me," Elliot replied cautiously. "I'm Detective Harris. We've received some concerning reports about the dogs in your care. Mind if I come in?" Elliot's heart sank. "Reports? What kind of reports?" Harris hesitated. "Anonymous tips alleging mistreatment and improper ownership documentation. It's standard procedure to follow up on these claims." Elliot stepped aside, allowing the detective in. "You're welcome to look around, but I can assure you those claims are baseless." As Harris toured the estate, the pups followed him closely, tails wagging. He observed their clean kennels, ample food supplies, and the warm bond they shared with Elliot. By the end of the visit, his demeanor softened. "Everything looks in order," Harris admitted. "It's clear these dogs are well cared for. But with the kind of attention you're getting, you might want to prepare for more scrutiny." Despite Harris's reassurances, the experience left Elliot rattled. He began noticing subtle changes in his daily life. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact, and strangers lingered too long near the estate gates. Even the pups seemed to sense the shift, their behavior more alert and protective during their walks. One night, as Elliot reviewed footage from the property's security cameras, something unusual caught his eye. A figure dressed in dark clothing had approached the gate around midnight, lingering for several minutes before retreating into the shadows. Elliot's chest tightened. Was someone trying to sabotage his efforts? Determined to protect his family and their mission, Elliot hired a private investigator to look into the source of the rumors and online attacks. The findings were both shocking and disheartening. "It appears someone from your past is behind this," the investigator explained. "A former business associate, Richard Kane. He's been feeding these stories to the media and online forums." Elliot's eyes narrowed. Richard Kane had been a ruthless competitor during Elliot's corporate career, known for his underhanded tactics. It seemed Kane was seeking revenge for an old grudge, using Elliot's newfound fame as a weapon. Rather than succumb to anger, Elliot decided to take a different approach. He reached out to a journalist he trusted, offering an exclusive interview to share the full story of his journey, from his decision to leave the corporate world to the rescue of the pups and the mission they had built together. The resulting article painted a vivid, honest picture of Elliot's life and the love he shared with his dogs. It highlighted the challenges they faced and the lives they had touched, countering the negative narrative with undeniable truth. As the article gained traction, public opinion began to shift once more. Messages of support flooded in, and even some of Elliot's critics admitted they had been too quick to judge. But the fight wasn't over. Kane's influence remained, and Elliot knew he had to stay vigilant. With the pups by his side, he resolved to face whatever challenges came next, their shared resilience a testament to the power of love and determination. In the aftermath of the revelations about Richard Kane's involvement, Elliot found himself reflecting deeply on his journey and the connections that had shaped it. The pups, as always, were a source of grounding and inspiration. But the recent turmoil had also strengthened Elliot's relationships with the people who had stood by him through the challenges. One such ally was Victor, the retired military trainer who had become not just a mentor for the dogs, but also a trusted friend. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the estate in a warm glow, Victor joined Elliot on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. "You've been through the ringer, my friend," Victor said, settling into the wooden chair beside Elliot. "But I have to say, you've handled it with more grace than most." Elliot smiled faintly. "I'm not sure about grace, but I've tried to stay focused on what matters." Victor nodded, his gaze drifting to the field where the pups were playing. "What matters is right there. Those dogs are a testament to resilience, and so are you." Elliot appreciated Victor's words, but the weight of the recent attack still lingered. It's hard not to feel disheartened, though. For every step forward, it seems like there's someone ready to pull us back. Victor leaned forward, his expression serious. "Then let them try. You've built something real here, Elliot. People see that. The truth always has a way of shining through, no matter how much mud someone throws at it." Inspired by Victor's encouragement, Elliot decided to shift his focus back to what truly mattered: the pups and the mission they represented. He began planning a community event, a day dedicated to showcasing the dogs' training, sharing their stories, and raising awareness for shelter animals. Word spread quickly, and as the event drew closer, support began to pour in from unexpected places. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now volunteered to help with logistics. Local businesses offered donations, from food and supplies to promotional materials. Even Detective Harris, who had conducted the earlier investigation, reached out. "If you need security or crowd control, let me know," he said over the phone. "I've seen firsthand what you're doing, and I'd be honored to help." As preparations for the event ramped up, Elliot found himself spending more time with each of the pups, reinforcing their training and deepening their bond. One evening, while working with Harper, the clever border collie mix, Elliot noticed something unusual. Harper was pacing near the fence, her nose to the ground, ears perked with alertness. "What is it, girl?" Elliot asked, approaching cautiously. Harper barked once, then darted toward the gate, her posture tense but controlled. Elliot followed her lead and soon spotted what had caught her attention: a small, trembling dog huddled in the underbrush just outside the property. It was a scruffy terrier mix, its fur matted and eyes wide with fear. "Easy now," Elliot murmured, crouching down and extending his hand. "You're safe here." Harper sat beside him, her presence seemingly reassuring the frightened dog. After a few moments, the terrier crept forward, its tail wagging tentatively. Back at the house, Elliot and Harper worked together to clean and feed the new arrival, whom Elliot named Scout. The terrier's transformation over the following days was remarkable. Once timid and wary, Scout quickly blossomed under the care of Elliot and the other dogs. The addition of Scout to their family felt like a small but significant victory, a reminder of why Elliot had embarked on this journey in the first place. On the day of the community event, the estate buzzed with activity. Rows of tents and booths lined the grounds, each one dedicated to a different aspect of the mission. There were demonstrations of the dog's skills, educational sessions on animal care, and adoption drives featuring local shelter animals. The pups stole the show, performing flawlessly under Victor's guidance. Harper wowed the crowd with her agility, while Bailey, the gentle giant of the group, showcased his ability to comfort anxious children. Even Scout, still new to the team, earned applause for his spirited determination in a simple obedience demonstration. Elliot took the stage toward the end of the day, his heart pounding as he faced the large crowd. He spoke from the heart, sharing the story of his journey with the pups and the challenges they had overcome together. "This isn't just about rescuing dogs," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "It's about what they've taught me and what they can teach all of us. Resilience, loyalty, love without conditions. These animals have given me more than I could ever repay, and my hope is that through this work, we can give others the chance to experience the same." The applause that followed was thunderous, but it was the personal connections made that day that truly mattered. Families who had adopted shelter dogs approached Elliot to share their stories. Children beamed as they petted the pups, their laughter echoing across the grounds. Even some of Elliot's former critics offered quiet words of apology and admiration. One moment stood out in particular. A young boy with a prosthetic leg approached Elliot, his parents close behind. He crouched to pet Harper, his eyes wide with wonder. "She's like me," he said softly, pointing to the scar on Harper's leg from her earlier injuries. "She didn't give up." Elliot knelt beside him, his throat tight with emotion. "That's right, she didn't give up, and neither did you." As the sun set on the successful event, Elliot stood with Victor, watching the crowd disperse. "This feels like a turning point," Elliot said, his voice filled with hope. Victor clapped him on the shoulder. "That's because it is. You've shown people the truth, Elliot. And it's something they won't forget." The success of the community event marked a high point for Elliot and the pups, but it wasn't long before trouble began brewing again. Word of the event's impact and the growing support for Elliot's mission reached the ears of those who resented his presence, people who preferred the status quo of the town's exclusivity and elitism. One evening, as Elliot was preparing dinner, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Harper, ever the vigilant protector, barked and positioned herself in front of the door, her tail stiff. Elliot approached cautiously, opening it to reveal Richard Kane standing on the porch, flanked by two associates. Well, Elliot," Richard began, his voice oozing condescension. "I hear you've become quite the hero around here, organizing events, inspiring the community. You must be proud." Elliot's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Richard?" Richard smirked, stepping closer. "To offer you a deal. Walk away now, sell this place, take your dogs and leave. I'll even make it worth your while." Elliot's eyes narrowed. "And why would I do that?" "Because," Richard said, his tone darkening, "you're making enemies in places you don't want to. People don't like being shown up, especially by someone like you. And if you're not careful, things might get messy." Harper growled low, sensing the tension, but Elliot placed a calming hand on her head. "I'm not afraid of bullies, Richard," he said firmly. "This place, these dogs, this mission, it's bigger than you and your threats." Richard's smirk faltered for a moment before he shrugged. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you." As Richard and his associates walked away, Elliot felt a knot of anger and unease form in his chest. He knew Richard wasn't bluffing. The man had resources and connections that could cause real trouble. Later that week, trouble indeed arrived in the form of a series of disruptions. The first was a baseless health inspection, with officials combing through the property and issuing a list of minor infractions. Then came an anonymous complaint about noise from the dogs, leading to a visit from local law enforcement. Though Elliot managed to address each issue, the constant scrutiny wore on him and the team. One night, as Elliot was reviewing paperwork, he heard a commotion outside. Rushing to the porch, he found Scout barking furiously at a group of strangers near the fence. The men scattered when they saw Elliot, leaving behind spray-painted messages on the outer walls of the estate. "Get out, and you don't belong here." Elliot's heart sank as he scrubbed the graffiti off the next morning. The pups stayed close, sensing his unease. "They're trying to scare us," he told Harper, who watched him intently. "But we're not going anywhere." Determined not to let fear dictate his actions, Elliot doubled down on his efforts. He contacted local allies, including Detective Harris, and shared the incidents. "I can't prove it's Richard Kane, but I know he's behind this," Elliot said. Harris nodded. "Leave it to me, I'll look into it." In the meantime, Elliot focused on protecting the estate and the pups. He installed security cameras and reinforced the property's boundaries. He also reached out to Victor, who rallied a group of fellow retired officers to provide additional support. Despite Elliot's precautions, the pressure continued to mount. Local gossip fueled speculation about the incidents, with some questioning whether Elliot's presence was worth the trouble it brought to the community. At the same time, supporters rallied around him, organizing a petition to counter the baseless complaints and demanding accountability from local authorities. The situation reached its boiling point during a town council meeting. Elliot attended with several allies, including Victor and a few families who had adopted rescue dogs from his program. The meeting room buzzed with tension as both supporters and detractors packed the space. Richard Kane, seated among the council members, made his position clear. "This isn't about one man and his dogs," he said, his voice smooth and calculated. "It's about preserving the character of our community. We have rules and standards for a reason." Elliot stood, his hands steady, despite the storm of emotions within him. "What Richard is really saying," he began, his voice strong and clear, "is that he's afraid of change, afraid of what this community could become if we opened our doors and our hearts to something different." Murmurs spread through the room as Elliot continued. "But here's the truth. Change is already happening. People are seeing the value of compassion and community. They're choosing hope over fear, and no amount of intimidation will stop that." As Elliot sat down, applause broke out from his supporters. Even some council members looked thoughtful, their expressions softening. Richard's face, however, remained a mask of controlled fury. The meeting ended without a clear resolution, but Elliot left feeling more resolved than ever. He knew the fight wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone. That night, as Elliot walked the grounds with the pups, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges were daunting, but the bond he shared with his dogs and the growing support from the community gave him strength. He knelt down beside Harper, scratching her behind the ears. "No matter what comes next," he said softly, "we face it together." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of anticipation. The battle for the estate, and everything it represented, was far from over. But Elliot was ready. As the tension escalated, Elliot knew the moment of confrontation with Richard Kane and his allies was drawing near. The subtle and overt attempts to intimidate him had reached a breaking point, and Elliot understood that the fight was not just about preserving his mission, but about standing up for the principles that defined him. One crisp morning, Elliot received a summons from the town council for a special hearing. The official letter cited concerns about community standards and the impact of his activities on local harmony. Though carefully worded, Elliot knew this was Richard Kane's doing. The hearing would be a showdown. Victor, who had become a steadfast confidant, joined Elliot at the kitchen table as they reviewed the letter. "This isn't just about shutting you down," Victor said, his tone grave. "This is about making an example out of you, to scare others from challenging people like Kane." Elliot nodded. "Then it's time to show them that intimidation won't work." In the days leading up to the hearing, Elliot prepared meticulously. He gathered testimonies from families who had adopted dogs through his program, compiled financial records proving his operations were above board, and sought statements from local businesses and allies who supported his mission. He even had Detective Harris ready to speak about the baseless complaints and acts of vandalism. Meanwhile, the pups seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. Harper stayed close to Elliot, her calm presence a source of strength. Scout, ever the spirited one, would nudge Elliot's hand with a toy whenever he looked too serious. Even Bailey, the gentle giant, seemed to patrol the estate with more purpose, as if protecting their shared home. The day of the hearing arrived, and Elliot walked into the town hall flanked by Victor, Detective Harris, and several supporters. The room was packed with many familiar faces, some allies, some skeptics, and others who had yet to take a side. At the head of the room sat the council members, with Richard Kane positioned prominently among them. His expression was smug, his posture relaxed, as if the outcome were already decided. The proceedings began with Richard laying out his argument. He painted Elliot's operations as disruptive and claimed they had eroded the character of the neighborhood. He cited the baseless complaints and framed the recent incidents as proof that Elliot's presence was causing division. When it was Elliot's turn to speak, he stood tall, his voice steady. "What's truly disruptive," he began, "is the idea that compassion and community are a threat. This isn't about noise complaints or property values. It's about fear. Fear of change and of what it means to embrace something different." He presented his evidence, refuting Richard's claims point by point. He spoke of the lives transformed by the dogs he had rescued and trained, of the connections forged within the community, and of the strength found in unity. Then he called upon others to speak. A mother tearfully shared how adopting a dog from Elliot had helped her son overcome anxiety. A local shop owner testified about the increase in community engagement since Elliot's event. Even Detective Harris spoke, confirming that many of the complaints against Elliot were unfounded and likely malicious. The most powerful testimony came from an elderly man named Mr. Hargrove, who had been a silent observer at many of Elliot's events. "I used to think people like Elliot didn't belong here," he admitted, his voice wavering. "But after seeing what he's done, I realized I was wrong. He's shown us what real community looks like." As the testimonies concluded, the mood in the room shifted. Even those who had initially sided with Richard began to murmur among themselves, their expressions thoughtful. Richard, sensing his grip slipping, stood for a rebuttal. "Let's not forget," he said, his tone sharp, "that this is about preserving the integrity of our town. We have rules for a reason." Elliot didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he looked directly at the council members. "If integrity means turning our backs on what's right, then maybe it's time to rethink what we stand for." After hours of deliberation, the council announced they would reconvene the next day to deliver their decision. As Elliot left the hall, he was met with a mix of applause and handshakes from supporters. Richard, however, stormed out, his face a mask of frustration. That evening, back at the estate, Elliot gathered the pups for a quiet moment of reflection. Sitting on the porch with Harper at his side, he felt a deep sense of calm. No matter the outcome, he knew he had done everything in his power to stand up for what he believed in. Late that night, as the estate lay quiet, an unexpected sound broke the stillness. Harper barked, her ears alert, and Scout joined her, growling low. Elliot grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, his heart pounding. Near the back fence, he spotted two figures trying to slip away into the shadows. "Stop!" he called, his voice firm. The figures hesitated before breaking into a run. Harper took off after them, her sharp bark echoing through the night. Elliot followed, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. Though the intruders escaped, they left behind tools that made their intentions clear. Bolt cutters and spray paint cans. It was another attempt to intimidate him, but Elliot refused to be shaken. The next morning, as Elliot prepared to return to the council meeting, he received a call from Detective Harris. "We've identified the men from last night," Harris said, "and they have ties to Richard Kane." Elliot's heart raced. This could be the final piece of evidence to expose Richard's true motives and turn the tide in his favor. The morning sun cast long shadows across the town as Elliot arrived at the council meeting. The atmosphere in the hall was electric, charged with the anticipation of the final decision. Supporters filled the room, their hopeful faces a stark contrast to the tense expressions of Richard Kane's allies. Elliot entered with Detective Harris by his side, carrying the new evidence linking the intruders to Richard. The weight of the past few weeks bore down on him, but the determined looks of his supporters fueled his resolve. The council members called the meeting to order. The chairperson began, "After careful deliberation, we are here to announce our decision regarding the future of Mr. Elliot Hartman's operations in our town." Before the decision could be revealed, Detective Harris raised his hand. "Before the council concludes, I must present crucial evidence regarding recent attempts to sabotage Mr. Hartman's work." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Harris as he stepped forward, holding a file. Last night, two individuals were caught trespassing on Mr. Hartman's property with the intent to vandalize. Upon investigation, we discovered their connection to none other than Mr. Richard Kane. Gasps rippled through the audience. Richard stood abruptly, his face pale. "This is a baseless accusation," he barked. Detective Harris remained unfazed. The evidence is irrefutable, Mr. Kane. Phone records, payments traced back to you, and witness testimonies place you at the center of this scheme. Your actions were not only unethical, but a direct violation of the law. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions grim. The chairperson addressed Richard. Mr. Kane, this is a serious matter. You are hereby suspended from your position pending a formal investigation. Richard's bravado crumbled. He sank back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Elliot took a deep breath and stepped forward. This isn't just about me, he began, his voice steady but firm. It's about the kind of community we want to build. Do we allow fear and prejudice to dictate our actions, or do we embrace compassion and unity? The audience murmured their agreement. One by one, supporters began to stand, voicing their admiration for Elliot's work and his perseverance in the face of adversity. A middle-aged woman rose, clutching a photo of her son with a rescue dog. Mr. Hartman's program saved my son's life. When no one else believed in him, the bond with his dog gave him purpose. Another man stood, tears glistening in his eyes. I lost my wife last year, and my dog, Bailey, was my only companion through the darkest times. That dog was trained by Mr. Hartman. He's not just saving animals, he's saving people. The testimonies turned the tide definitively in Elliot's favor. Even council members who had once seemed skeptical now appeared moved by the outpouring of support. As the chairperson prepared to read the council's decision, a sudden movement caught everyone's attention. Richard Kane stood, his face a mixture of rage and desperation. You all think this man is a hero, he spat, but he's nothing more than a publicity stunt. He's exploiting your emotions for his gain. Elliot remained composed. The only one exploiting people here is you, Richard. And now the truth is clear. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers drowning out Richard's protests. Security personnel escorted him from the room, his attempts to defend himself falling on deaf ears. The chairperson cleared her throat, bringing the room back to order. After reviewing all evidence and considering the testimonies presented, the council has reached a unanimous decision. Mr. Hartman's operations are not only permissible, but commendable. We are proud to have someone of his character in our community. The hall erupted in cheers. Elliot's supporters surged forward, shaking his hand and clapping him on the back. Tears filled Elliot's eyes as he looked out at the crowd. Later that day, back at the estate, Elliot stood on the porch with Harper, Scout, and Bailey by his side. Supporters had gathered on the lawn, bringing food, flowers, matin, and banners of gratitude. Victor approached, holding a glass of lemonade. You did it, he said, clinking his glass against Elliot's. No, Elliot replied, gazing at the crowd. We did it. The sound of children laughing drew his attention. Families played with their adopted dogs on the grass, their joy a testament to everything he had fought for. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and orange, Elliot felt a deep sense of peace. The fight had been hard, but it had been worth it. The bond between the community and the dogs he loved so dearly had grown stronger, and the tide of prejudice had been turned. For the first time in months, Elliot allowed himself to relax. Harper lay her head on his lap, her amber eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. This is just the beginning, he whispered, stroking her fur. And together, we'll keep making a difference. The celebration at the estate had begun to wind down as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling property. Elliot stood on the front steps, Harper at his side, watching the last of the families gather their belongings and head home. The joy in their faces, the way the dogs pranced alongside them, tails wagging, was a living testament to the victories they had achieved. But one last surprise awaited. As Elliot turned to head inside, the sound of a car engine rumbling up the driveway stopped him in his tracks. A sleek black sedan pulled up, and from it stepped a well-dressed man with a warm smile, accompanied by a young girl clutching a leash. At the end of the leash was a scruffy golden puppy, his ears flopping with every bounce. Mr. Hartman, the man began, extending a hand. I'm Charles Preston, CEO of the National Canine Therapy Foundation. I heard about what you've accomplished here, and I had to come see it for myself. Elliot shook his hand, a mix of confusion and intrigue crossing his face. It's an honor, Mr. Preston. "What brings you all this way?" Preston gestured to the little girl. "This is my daughter, Lily. She wanted to bring you a very special thank you gift. You see, her puppy, Milo, was trained using techniques inspired by your work." Lily stepped forward shyly, her tiny hands gripping the leash. "Thank you, Mr. Hartman," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Milo helped me feel brave again." Elliot knelt down, his gaze meeting Lily's. "You're the brave one, Lily. Milo just helped you see it." Preston placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder and turned back to Elliot. "I've been following your journey. The trials you faced, the work you've done, it's nothing short of extraordinary. That's why I'm here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to Elliot. Inside was a formal letter offering a partnership between the Foundation and Elliot's program. "We want to help expand your vision," Preston said. "With our resources, you could bring your training methods to a national level. Imagine facilities like this one in every state, transforming lives." Elliot's heart raced as he scanned the letter. The offer wasn't just financial support. It included access to training facilities, a team of professionals, and a network of therapists who would integrate the dogs into their programs. I don't know what to say," Elliot finally stammered, emotion thick in his voice. Preston smiled. "Say yes. Say that together. We can make this bigger than either of us ever imagined." That night, as the house grew quiet, Elliot sat in his study. The letter from Preston spread across his desk. The weight of the opportunity felt immense, but it was a weight he was ready to carry. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. It was Victor, carrying 2 mugs of steaming coffee. "You look like a man trying to solve the world's problems in one night," Victor said, setting a mug down. Elliot chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "It's just, I never thought it would come to this. When I started, I just wanted to save a few dogs. Now there's a chance to save thousands." Victor leaned against the desk, his expression thoughtful. "You've always had that in you, Elliot. This place isn't just about the dogs. It's about hope. For them, for the people who need them, and for this town. If anyone can take this to the next level, it's you." Elliot nodded, the gravity of Victor's words sinking in. "We're going to need a bigger team, more space, a lot of work." Victor grinned, "And we're ready for it." The following weeks were a whirlwind. With Preston's backing, Elliot's program expanded rapidly. New kennels and training spaces were built, employing locals who had once doubted him. Trainers and volunteers arrived from across the country, eager to learn from Elliot's methods. The first major project was a regional therapy center, designed to train dogs for children with special needs and veterans with PTSD. Families from neighboring towns visited to see the work in action, many leaving with newfound admiration for the program, and sometimes a new 4-legged family member. The local community, once resistant, now embraced the changes with open arms. Former critics like Mrs. Calloway and Richard Kane quietly extended olive branches, volunteering at events and donating supplies. The transformation was undeniable. On the day of the center's grand opening, Elliot stood at the podium, Harper at his side. Behind him, rows of newly trained therapy dogs waited with their handlers, ready to meet their new families. "I started this journey to honor the bond between humans and animals," Elliot began, his voice steady. "But along the way, I learned that this bond is more powerful than I ever imagined. It can heal wounds, bridge divides, and bring out the best in all of us." He paused, glancing at the crowd. Among them were children laughing, veterans smiling, and families united by the joy these dogs had brought into their lives. "This isn't just my work, it's ours," he continued. "And together, we're building something that will last for generations." The crowd erupted in applause as ribbons were cut, and the first families stepped forward to meet their new canine companions. As the day wound down, Elliot stood at the edge of the training field, watching as Harper and Bailey played with the newest recruits. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the scene. Victor joined him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Look at this, Elliot." "This is what change looks like." Elliot smiled, his heart full. "It's just the beginning." And as the sounds of laughter and barking filled the air, Elliot knew he had found not just a mission, but a legacy. One built on trust, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a man, his dogs, and the community they saved together. As the sun set over the sprawling fields of the training center, casting long golden rays across the grounds, Elliot found himself standing quietly by the fence. Harper rested at his feet, his loyal companion watching the activity with calm curiosity. The hum of voices and laughter echoed around him as families played with their newly adopted dogs, and volunteers packed up the remnants of a day that would be etched into the memories of all who attended. Elliot's thoughts wandered back to where it all began, those first uncertain steps after he left the force, unsure if he could ever make a difference again. The dogs had saved him as much as he had saved them, pulling him out of a darkness he hadn't realized he was trapped in. And now they were saving others, proving that the bond between humans and animals could transform lives. Victor joined him, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. "Looks like your dream turned into something pretty extraordinary," he said, handing Elliot a glass. "Did you ever think it would come to this?" Elliot took a sip, his gaze never leaving the field. "Not in my wildest dreams. I just wanted to do right by these dogs, give them a second chance. I didn't realize they'd end up teaching me what hope really looks like." Victor nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "It's not just about the dogs, though. You've given this town something it didn't even know it needed: unity, purpose, a reason to believe in something bigger than themselves." Elliot glanced at the families interacting with their new furry companions. A child giggled as a golden retriever licked her face. A veteran knelt by a Labrador, speaking softly as the dog rested a paw on his knee. The transformation was evident in every interaction, every bond forming right before his eyes. "They did that," Elliot said, gesturing toward the dogs. "They're the real heroes here." As the evening drew to a close, the crowd began to disperse. Families waved goodbye, their arms filled with leashes, adoption packets, and heartfelt gratitude. Volunteers carried crates back to the storage area, chatting about the next big event. Elliot, in with Harper at his side, walked back toward the main building, his heart heavy but full. He paused at the plaque by the entrance, a recent edition commemorating the program's impact. It read, "In honor of those who believed in the power of second chances and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Together, we heal, grow, and create a brighter future." He ran his fingers over the words, a lump forming in his throat. It wasn't just his journey anymore. It belonged to every person who had walked through those doors, every dog that had found a home, and every life that had been touched by their mission. That night, as the house grew quiet, Elliot settled into his favorite chair by the fireplace. Harper curled up at his feet, Bailey snoozing nearby. The flicker of the flames cast a warm glow across the room, highlighting the framed photographs on the mantel, snapshots of the countless lives their program had changed. Victor entered, a mischievous grin on his face. "You're going to love this," he said, holding up a tablet. On the screen was a local news feature about the day's event. The headline read, "From Strays to Saviors, How One Man's Vision Transformed a Community." Elliot chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I didn't do it alone," Victor smirked. "You can be humble later. Tonight you should be proud." As Victor left the room, Elliot leaned back in his chair, his eyes lingering on the screen. The faces of smiling children, grateful veterans, and wagging tails filled the video. For the first time in a long time, Elliot allowed himself to fully feel the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. In the weeks that followed, the program continued to grow. The partnership with Preston's Foundation brought new resources, new opportunities, and a larger platform to share their mission. Local skeptics had become staunch supporters, their initial resistance melting away in the face of undeniable impact. And through it all, the dogs remained the heart of the operation, each one a symbol of resilience, loyalty, and the incredible things that can happen when someone believes in you. This story is a testament to the power of second chances, not just for the animals who find homes, but for the people whose lives they transform. If this tale of resilience and hope and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals has touched your heart, consider supporting programs like these in your community. And if you're ready to hear more stories of courage and connection, click on the next video. It's one you won't want to miss. Together, Let's celebrate the heroes who walk on four legs and the humans who stand beside them.